Video games are an excellent tool for language learning, especially if you already play them in your spare time. By immersing yourself in a video game, you are constantly exposed to your target language and you can practice your reading and your listening skills. However, not all video games offer the same language learning opportunities. Some are better resources than others, and your current level as a language learner also will influence the kind of video games you play and how you play them. In this video, we're going to look at two different approaches to playing video games for language learning, how to choose the best video game for your current level and preferences, and a few other general tips. I'm going to show footage of games in German because that's the language that I'm currently learning, but everything I'm going to talk about in this video can be useful for whatever language you're studying. So let's start with the question, why are video games great tools for language learning? I don't think video games are necessarily better or worse resources than, say, films or books. It just comes down to what you prefer to do so that your study time is filled with activities that are interesting to you and that are likely to keep you studying. There is the fact that with video games you are more involved in the story because you are the one controlling the action and moving the story forward, which can make it more engaging and help you remember what you come across. Video games allow you to practice your listening, reading, or both at the same time. There is an infinite amount of different types of video games, so there's always something new to play for everybody, and unless you're extremely picky, they're really affordable or sometimes even free. Having said that, I feel that video games are a great resource if you are an upper beginner or lower intermediate learner. Absolute beginners will not benefit so much from this type of immersion unless they're playing video games specifically designed to teach the basics of a language, such as a video game for kids. In this video, I'm going to talk about video games aimed at native speakers used as normal immersion content. Apart from learning vocabulary and grammar rules, immersion should take up a lot of your study time. So if you like to play video games, you should definitely add them to your study routine. Now let's talk about which video games are actually better for language learning. As I said before, you won't benefit equally from all video games. Especially in the beginning, it's hard to immerse yourself if you're not using optimal content, which would be content from which you understand more or less 80% of what's going on and maybe 20% goes over your head. This is an ideal, so sometimes you will want to engage with content that is above or below your level. That's totally fine. I feel that for me, optimal content is a term that is very flexible and that changes all the time. If you don't do it at all, it's not going to be optimal, so sometimes it's better to just play something you want to play instead of worrying too much about what the ideal resource is. A good tip is that games in which you decide when to move on to the next line of dialogue are particularly useful. They give you time to read and to process what you're reading. Of course, story-based and text-centered games are usually the ones that are richer in content, more so than games that have a lot of action or where characters spend a lot of time without saying a word. Remember that in general, the more text a game presents you with, the more difficult it's going to be for you to use it as immersion content. Games with an incredible amount of text may be great resources, but they may be better suited for an advanced learner, and they can be really exhausting for a beginner. In general, it's a good idea for the video game you choose to have a healthy balance of gameplay and textual elements, because gameplay functions as a natural break and gives your brain time to rest. Try to strike a balance between having fun and learning from the content. Prioritize games that you enjoy playing and then move on to more complex or text-heavy games as you progress. There's also several ways in which you can decrease the difficulty of your immersion. For example, if you play something that you're familiar with, either because you've played it before or because you know the universe or the characters that appear in it. But above all, if you don't enjoy it, just don't use it. Remember that you can use that time to watch YouTube videos or movies or read a book if you find it more interesting and motivating. The game you choose to play will also depend on the approach you will use for studying it. I'm going to talk about these two different approaches later on in the video. Let's talk about how to find video games for language learning. System requirements are something to bear in mind when you're choosing a video game. But nowadays, that's not really that much of a problem. I've found a lot of newer games that are very light to run, and you can even play older games or games for older consoles that have an enormous potential for language learning. Games for the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS or 64 and the GameCube have a lot of language learning potential, and you can emulate them for free and in a very easy way. Some of them you can even run on your phone if that's what you prefer to do. When it comes to finding games, you can also use Steam to search by language. Inside each game's store page, you can scroll down and see which languages are available for the audio, the subtitles, and the interface. I mentioned Steam because it's the most popular gaming platform, but I think other platforms such as Origin or Epic also allow you to search by language. It's harder with newer consoles because they're usually region locked, which means that you only have access to a few languages. I have a PS4 and I cannot switch most of the games in there to German, which is a shame, so I'd recommend sticking with PC. At least make sure that you can play the game in your desired language before buying anything. The way I see it, there are two different approaches when you sit down to play a game. This doesn't really apply only to video games, but to every type of immersion. But of course, I'm going to use video games to exemplify in this video. I'm talking about extensive and intensive immersion. Let's start with extensive immersion. This is where you simply open a game and play it without any active focus on studying what's going on. Of course, you try to understand the story, but if you come across something that you don't understand, either you let it pass or you look it up in a dictionary only if you think it's really important for your engagement with the game. And that's the whole point of your extensive immersion, to enjoy the game you're playing. This means that the pool of games you can choose from is a little wider because you're not limited by this idea of the optimal game to play. Anything with a reasonable amount of text will do. For extensive immersion, you should prioritize games that you are interested in. For example, I've been playing Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the GameCube and having a lot of fun with it. I haven't played it before, but it's easier for me to understand everything that's going on because I'm familiar with the story and the characters. The game is also a great choice because it is fully voiced and it has matching subtitles for the audio.
Potter, du bist dran.
Something like Pokemon or Zelda for the Game Boy Advance are also great choices. I've found that Game Boy games offer great opportunities for reading practice because you can always decide when to move on with the text. The vocabulary in these games ranges from really basic stuff to some more complex and obscure sentences. It's also no problem if something a character says goes over your head because the gameplay is simple enough so that you can progress with the game even without understanding every single bit of language. I've been having a lot of fun with Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance for these reasons. I've also played a lot of Stardew Valley. It contains a lot of useful and bite-sized everyday language, and it's mixed with moments of relaxing gameplay to rest. If you play the game online with a friend, or in my case with my sister, you can even ask them to translate pieces of text if you don't understand them and you really want to. These are just ideas, of course. When it comes to immersion, the choice is yours. So as long as you're not playing something that has no text at all, like FIFA or Super Mario, you're going to be fine. This kind of extensive immersion is great because it doesn't require any type of preparation. As long as you can find the game that you want to play, you're good to go. And the more time you spend doing this type of immersion, the better. On the other hand, we have intensive immersion. This is when you actually open the game and sit down to study it. Intensive immersion is much more demanding and tiring than extensive immersion, so you'll probably want to do this in short, focused sessions. The idea is to pay special attention to everything that comes up in the game you're playing. When I do intensive immersion, unless a sentence seems extremely difficult to understand, I try to break it down and understand every component individually and the sentence as a whole. You can look up words in the dictionary whenever it's necessary. If you choose the right input, you shouldn't be coming across these extremely difficult sentences all the time. And if you are, maybe you should switch to a different game. Even if you try to understand everything in the game, you should know that video games have a lot of specific terminology, so you probably don't want to study everything. You have to be selective about the phrases you want to internalize. I keep a record of these sentences in Anki because I really like to study with flashcards, but you can take notes in whatever ways you find useful. Again, for this type of immersion, the choice is yours as regards which game to play. But the more optimal content that I talked about before is going to be more useful for this type of immersion. I recommend visual novels or dating simulators because they have a lot of text, and this text is easier to extract from the game than in other types of video games. I'll show you some methods for extracting text from these video games in a different video in case you're interested in sentence mining. Lately I've been playing Coffee Talk, which is a game in which you're a barista in a coffee shop and you talk to your customers about the problems that they have in their life. It's great because despite the fantasy setting, it has a lot of everyday language and I can choose the speed at which I advance with it. This might not be the best game for you. You might not be that interested in visual novels. You can choose something else, but I do think that in this type of immersion, it isn't that important to balance gameplay and text because you're going to be doing this in short sessions anyway. It's alright if the density of the text is high. If you choose to play a particular game for intensive immersion, be prepared to progress relatively slowly with it. The focus here is on the language, not the experience of the game itself, although I've found that the games that I play for intensive immersion, I end up enjoying just as much or more than the ones I play extensively. And then there's the question of how much of this immersion you should be doing. I wouldn't be too strict when deciding specific amounts of time for each type of immersion. I do think that immersion is something that you should be doing most of your study days or all of them, and it's the most important activity, not only through video games but through any kind of media. As intensive immersion is way more tiring, I try to do half an hour a day, and the rest of my immersion time is occupied with extensive immersion. Some days I don't feel like doing intensive immersion at all, and that's also fine. As I study a lot with flashcards, I try to have at least 10 new flashcards to study every day. This allows me to take breaks for a few days, but to always stay motivated to come back and do some more sentence mining to have enough flashcards to study from. Of course, sometimes I'll choose YouTube videos or films, but video games are always a great resource that's there waiting for you. Extensive immersion, on the other hand, is something that I really enjoy doing, so it's not really a problem to simply open up a video game and start playing it. Even on my most lazy days, I try to spend time doing any kind of activity in German for at least 1 hour a day. So I hope you found some of this useful or interesting. Remember to be patient and to keep immersing yourself. You'll soon realize how much of this works as a cycle, and the words that you come across through your intensive immersion start showing up in your extensive immersion all the time, and you start internalizing them. Let me know what type of video games you like to play for language learning and which other approaches you have for engaging with this type of content. I would love to read your comments and suggestions. I hope you have a nice day, keep studying, and I'll see you in the next video.